Heleri, we see in the latest wellness real estate report that the F&B share of total revenue has held really steady at 31% for both major and minor. What does this really tell us? Is this a sign of maturity or are we seeing missed opportunities in F&B?
I see it primarily, Roger, as a sign of maturity. The report shows us that food and beverage have become sort of an established component of the wellness hospitality business model, but I also see it as an opportunity. And I think the report rightly notes that this higher contribution is linked to not only wellness programming, but also to the guest mix, resort positioning, and the kind of asset type that it sits in. And I think it tells us that operators have already sort of prepared to engage, to have the guests engage with the F&B offer. And I think the next challenge isn't necessarily increasing the F&B share of revenue, but making every F&B touch point reinforce that wellness proposition and also improve then overall commercial performance.
You touch on interesting points there. You spoke about profile and guest mix. How does that influence your F&B strategy from a consulting point of view and obviously then from an operational perspective?
Yes, I think that it's becoming increasingly more important. Like we've always said, we need to know what the guests want. So I think the profiling is really, really important. Of what are sort of the touch points that we want to make sure that we bring and highlight? Because and in our consulting work, I think we always have to keep in mind that no one size fits all. So you have to understand who your absolute target customer is and what are you trying to sell to them. I mean, it is, a time-old formula, but we keep forgetting it because in this day and age with social media and this and that, we kind of want to produce an offering to everyone, but that's not really the winning proposition. You really need to understand where is it you want to target and who is your audience. You really need to understand that audience and then tune into those relevant touch points that will make that offer really stand out to them. And F&B does lead with that.
Okay, back to wellness real estate report, and we saw that minor wellness is really the only category showing material F&B revenue growth per occupied room in 2025. What does this tell us in terms of what other properties could be doing differently?
Yeah, I think they're demonstrating that you don't need the largest wellness infrastructure to grow guest spend. I think instead they're showing that the value of carefully curated experiences where food and beverage feels connected to the overall guest journey. And I think, can it be replicated? Absolutely, but it doesn't mean that we need to be copying a smaller model. What I think that the major wellness properties should really leverage is their greater breadth of facilities while adopting the same principle, ensuring that F&B isn't operating independently from wellness, but supporting and reinforcing the overall guest experience that you're really trying to, again, through that strategy, you're trying to enforce.
Mm-hmm. Minor wellness also leads on F&B profit conversion at 28%, outperforming major wellness despite absolute revenue. How do you explain this gap? And I think it's an important one because, margins typically in F&B, are not easy to come by.
Very true. And I think the report actually gives us the answer. The minor wellness achieves the highest profit conversion because it operates with a more balanced cost structure. Departmental expenses and also payroll are both lower than in minor wellness while still maintaining that sort of comparable F&B contribution to total revenue. So I think the lesson isn't that minor wellness is inefficient. I think the scale comes with additional costs, and operators also need to ensure that every additional service genuinely creates value for guests. I think the value creation is a really important theme here.
And your quote in the report, states F&B is increasingly becoming the bridge between major and minor wellness models. How do you can you expand on that? What does it look like in practice for operators today?
Yeah, I think food and beverage sits between those two models because every guest interacts with it. Every guest has to eat, whether you're in major wellness or minor wellness property. So I think for major wellness, F&B helps connect an extensive wellness ecosystem into one coherent experience. And I think in minor wellness, F&B becomes one of those strongest expression of the brand, allowing the operators to deliver a compelling wellness proposition without really needing extensive infrastructure. So I think they're different models, but the objective is the same, is to use food to reinforce the property's wellness identity. So I think, again, going back to those basic layers of what you're trying to deliver to the guest, how it enhances the overall guest experience, and what are the touch points you want your guests to go through in their wellness journey and their F&B journey. So I think those two have to kind of be aligned.
Touching a little bit on room service. Now, obviously, this has typically been over the past few years a declining area of revenue sources for all hotels across all sectors. And in the Wellness Real Estate report, we see it's marginal across all categories. However, Major Wellness recorded an 8% increase in room service per occupied room. Really, the only category showing growth there. What's your, assessment of that? What do you believe is driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key point is that it's never going to be room service is never going to be a sort of a major revenue stream. I think we're way past that era. But I think what it is telling us in the major wellness category is that guests are using sort of more comprehensive wellness programs increasingly who value convenience, privacy, and flexibility during their stay. And we see that a lot from guest behavioral psychology when we look at how people use different properties. So I think it does reinforce the broader trend that we see across the luxury hospitality, that guests expect the experience to adapt to them rather than the other way around. So I think it gives that more flexibility and privacy and them taking decisions when and how they want to eat.
Do you think that from a F&B offering in the room, and of course everything's centralized, either it's room service or it's minibar, is the minibar becoming a redundant amenity in the room? What are your thoughts on that now? Because I just speak for myself. Typically, if I've stayed in a hotel, and I've stayed in a lot of hotels over the last few months, you know, I've never really touched the mini bar. It's pretty standard. It's very vanilla. It doesn't stock the product that I would really be consuming anyway. I also have to think about the operational costs to keep that running. What are your thoughts on the mini bar in a hotel room?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. I think first question is, are you a leisure guest or are you a business traveler when you go to these properties, right? I think there's already a big distinction. I think it also depends on the level of category you're hitting. Are you luxury? Are you ultra luxury? I think the higher you go, the more necessary it is to have a minibar offering. And we've seen a lot of innovation in that sector as well, with very interesting pre-made cocktails coming into play, lots of no and low offerings, a lot of products from the local neighborhood, just really shining a light on local producers when and how it's stocked, and also creating sort of an in-room experience with this minibar offering of, how you pour yourself a cocktail, having a little bit of like an experiential component to it. But I think it can mostly be done from a cost perspective as well, just in the luxury and ultra luxury category. I do think that we're seeing minibars completely going out on the lower categories. And I think from a wellness perspective, I think you can enforce a lot of these touch points again. And when you have larger suites, more dwell time in the room as opposed to out of the room, I do think it's a component that you cannot ignore, and I think it's a very important touch point also for storytelling, not just for consumption.
Mhm. What would you recommend, suggest to investors and developers in how to position F&B when planning a new hotel that may have a significant wellness component?
Yes, I think my overall advice would be not to design food and beverage as a standalone revenue department. I think instead you need to ask the question of how F&B contribute to the overall guest proposition. So for a major wellness, that might mean ensuring the culinary experience complements the scale of the wellness program. And for minor wellness, it may become one of those defining brand experiences that differentiates the property. So I think ultimately successful wellness hospitality isn't about having more restaurants or bigger kitchens. It's about creating one coherent experience where accommodation, wellness proposition, and food all sort of reinforce the same story. So I think it's much more nuanced than, oh, let's put an all-day dining and a specialty restaurant and a speakeasy bar in a property, but really understanding the underlying pillars of what it needs to deliver as to the guest experience and what level, what are these touch points, and how do you differentiate? Because the market is heavily saturated. And I think if you don't get the story and those touch points right, then you just have another boring F&B offering that is sort of replicated throughout all the other competitor properties.
Mm-hmm. What are the trends that you're seeing in F&B? And okay, let's just make it a little bit more specific, particularly in beverage, and of course from a wellness angle. I mean,
Yeah.
what are the shifts that you're seeing in terms of alcohol versus non-alcohol? And is this having any impact on top line, bottom line performance of beverages in hotels?
Oh, absolutely. I think the whole rise of low and no and fantastic mocktails. We're seeing a lot of savory coming into the mocktail space, which is beautiful, which again, plays to the whole storytelling of the food waste. So you work a lot with so the bartenders work a lot with chefs to understand what sort of ingredient leftover parts they can be putting into the beverage program, and then sort of use that as another storytelling element on sustainability. So I think that's a really interesting part. Also helps the bottom line because of food costs are lower, and you sort of you're using the ingredients to their absolute maximum. So I do think there's a really beautiful sort of string that comes through that process of chefs and bartenders working together. I think we see a lot from the numbers, obviously, that drinking alcohol has dropped quite significantly, especially with the younger consumer. And knowing that they are a lot of the decision makers, especially with multi-generational travel going to wellness properties, we really need to pay attention to what is it that generation wants and how are they defining the F&B experience when they all go out to eat as a family. So I think there's some really interesting trends we see on that front as well. I think beverage menus have to change radically. Having traveled recently also to luxury, wellness resort properties, I think there's definitely a lot of improvement that can be done because on a sunny day you might not crank up a rosé, but a beautiful non-alcohol bubbly that has been sort of sourced locally and has a bit of storytelling to that as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity by just menu re-engineering, and we do a lot of that work with our company. We have a menu scientist that works on our team to really understand how you bring those better elements that align with the current trends to the forefront on both food but also on the beverage menus.
I love menu scientist.
Absolutely. Shout out to Claire from the team. It's fantastic because there is so much science behind behavioral psychology and how people engage and look at menus, the stretch pricing that you need to do between different dishes, different beverages, because 95% of our decision making is irrational and based on emotion. So as hospitality business, we need to really use that for our advantage to convert that into a better bottom line.
Just touching on that quickly in terms of bottom line and speaking to the economics of beverages, because the assumption would be if you're not selling alcohol, or selling less of the alcohol, then in top line will be affected. Now, obviously, if you're just selling carrot juice, you would also consider that maybe the top line will be affected, but also maybe there is a better return on the bottom line. Okay, I'm being quite crude with this, example there. But what is the, kind of changing in the economics of beverage?
Yes, I think you're looking at two costs here. You're looking at labor cost and you're looking at food cost and beverage cost, right? Because that's your biggest components hitting to your bottom line. So I think when you need less let's say, maybe highly trained bartenders to make, crazy cocktails like it was maybe a couple of years ago. Now that we're moving more to the low and no category, there's less of that mixology thinking potentially involved. So you are lowering your labor cost by having these more streamlined. And again, but potentially all your staff being able to produce that. So I do think is a really fine balance of understanding what's the level of skill needed to do and deliver on some of these beverage items, and how you can sort of manipulate those two major cost centers and have a better bottom line. So I do think it's a very fine balance to get that right. But we have seen properties being those would have really drilled down to understand what's the skill level needed. How can I leverage my staff better to make these 5 mocktails, or maybe they're pre-batched in the kitchen by the kitchen staff, and certain elements just added together with ice and garnish and whatnot. So that is a different labor model that we're looking at than your more sort of traditional bartending.
Mm-hmm. Can you, because you mentioned the word there, skill, how
Yeah.
easy to find that talent and train that skill, to have a creative, bartender that can, recreate the experience of those mocktails that you are referring to. I mean, obviously in hospitality, we have these challenges in recruitment and retaining staff. What are you seeing in F&B?
Yeah, I think it's a whole can of worms you just opened there, Roger. So it's that the talent is and staffing and retention and recruitment is all a massive issue in the industry, across the board, across geographies. No one's really untouched by that. Obviously, there are certain regions that are doing better because labor is just cheaper. But at the same time, when you're looking at maybe more Western European countries where the labor numbers are, labor cost is really high, I think properties have to be, especially senior management, has to be really, really clever on how they're doing staffing and how they're doing skilling of people across the different departments. And especially when you look at smaller properties, so let's say minor wellness, I think it's really important to have cross training. And I think that's the key word that we're sort of really looking at an F&B, is the cross training of staff, so that when your sous chef doesn't show up one day, someone else can pick up some of that and leverage that for that time being. And same on the bar side. And I think the one good thing about low and no and maybe mocktails is that you can replicate those menus and can have staff deliver them with less training than perhaps some of the more sort of complicated cocktails that needs to get very good balance with alcohol and etc. So I think, of course, you can do some fantastic things on the low and no mocktails as well. But I do think that there is a fine there's an opportunity actually to use that sort of cross training to make sure that staff can deliver on those different touch points, fairly easily, so that when you have a staffing shortage on your hands, people are still able to deliver that experience. Because what we essentially want is the guests not to know that you're paddling like a duck underneath, but everything is very smooth as a delivery on the top, right? Because that's technically what hospitality is. It's a lot of hustling in the background to be able to deliver that coherent guest experience. And I do think that that's something that that a clever GM and their team can really manage, but it is a constant management. And I think that's one of the issues also with the younger generation. We see they demand different things from their employers, a lot more flexibility, different hours. So it is very much up to the management to really understand how to steer that ship and fairly quickly probably change course when just making sure that the guest experience stays fairly the same. So I think it is a very delicate dance, and I think it's getting tougher and tougher as the labor market and the margins are being squeezed.
Thank you for those insights. Also, you may have seen a thumbs up that was kind of floating across the screen, and I think AI in this Zoom recording is interpreting my hand signals without me being
Oh
aware.
dear Lord.
So if this goes out, it was unintentional, but yeah, it was. I was thinking, I love the insight that you're sharing. So the
Good. My
animation's real.
pleasure. My pleasure.
What do you think, coming back to the wellness real estate report, What do you believe investors and developers and operators really gain from reading the Wellness Real Estate Report?
I think it's, really understanding what are the drivers of profitability and what are some of the nuances that should really be looked at. Because I do think the devil's in the detail in any project, and it's to really understand the basis of your guest experience and what are the sort of the pillars it needs to stand on and how it then connects to the different touch points of F&B, of wellness, of fitness, of the accommodation side, right? Because everything sort of needs to be in sync. And then how is that experience delivered? That's up to your ops team, and how well is that strategy that's been put in place that looks, beautiful on a paper, then translated to your operational team, and then comes to life. So I do think it's also really important, and we've seen the projects that we're working on in the wellness space, that you need to bring that senior management on board much earlier. Yes, it is a cost to the project overall to bring someone in maybe a couple of months before than originally planned, but it really helps to distill that journey and understand and make them understand what is it you're trying to achieve. Because if a development team has been working on a project and the strategy for 3-4 years prior to opening, and then someone else coming in who needs to then operate and recruit their team and get everyone on board, there's always going to be some sort of shuffling and operationalizing that experience. And I do think that from my side, it's really crucial that those things happen sooner rather than later, so the strategy is translated in a cohesive way to the operations, because otherwise a lot of that work and thinking and that has gone into it kind of just falls by the wayside, because someone needs to quickly get the team on board, open, operate, get the guests in, not really taking a step back, having the time to take the step back to be able to deliver on what is initially the core of the offering.
Thank you, Heleri. I think we've got everything there perfectly.